Okay, just devoured this section and wow, the pace is insane. We go from establishing a high-tech mint churning out intricate brass coins, the detail on the alloy and process was fascinating, to training the first batch of officials and launching a full-scale census using bamboo slips. The sudden food crisis in Liuyang is tackled head-on with that absolutely brilliant winter fishing operation. Seeing those fish literally jump out of the ice holes was pure genius problem-solving, and such a relief. And the rat shaman storyline? So poignant, but thankfully resolved by giving him the crucial role of director of celestial observation. Then, bam! The crossbow debate is settled with that killer demonstration, proving practicality trumps tradition, paving the way for mass production. But the final reveal of the three-bow bed crossbow with its potential for flaming and exploding bolts, jaw-dropping. What kind of medieval arms race is this going to spark? I can't wait to see these terrifying weapons deployed. All right, the Han tribe was now dressed in respectable clothes. It was time to talk about civility. But as for how to establish these rites and etiquette, you didn't have a clue for the moment. You had to set some standards first, right? You sent away that group of intern officials. The convoy of carts that had brought fish when they arrived was now crammed full of brand new farming implements, tools, and piles of cloth, rolling mightily back towards Liuyang Commandery. These graduates would henceforth put down roots in Liuyang Commandery. Their first task, the same as in Hanyang Commandery, taking a census. If you didn't figure out how many mouths you had under your command, any plan you made, no matter how good, would be useless. However, you knew in your heart that Liuyang Commandery definitely had fewer people but more households, with a ridiculously high proportion of adults, unlike Hanyang City, where families had several kids each, like popping out babies one after another. Who could blame them? The old residents of Hanyang City had found stability early on, and had been having children energetically these past few years. Adding the several hundred kids you'd rescued from the fire tribe, the survival rate had shot up. The result was that Hanyang City didn't look like it had many households, but its population was substantial, especially with a heap of unruly kids, while the adult labor force was actually strained. Liuyang Commandery was different. Among those tens of thousands of people, the earliest had joined the Han tribe only a year ago, and the most recent just 3 months ago. Where would they find the time to start a baby boom? Especially those who had just migrated with their entire families. The journey itself was exhausting enough. Regardless of the era, migrating with one's family wasn't a walk in the park. Especially in this primitive society, long treks, eating in the wind and sleeping in the open. Those who survived were tough characters. The old, weak, sick, and disabled? Sorry, for the tribe to continue, they had to be left behind. Sound cruel? There was no choice. This was the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. No one could escape it. Therefore, those who managed to reach the Han tribe were basically the elite survivors from their respective tribes. Those with weaker physiques had long since become food for wild beasts or wandering ghosts along the way. Of course, a few lucky individuals might have survived, becoming the wild folk you spoke of, continuing to struggle in the mountains. There was still a month until the next spring, and you had already clearly arranged your small goals for the New Year expansion continue to expand. All right, this wasn't really a plan. It was the necessary path towards your ultimate goal, the dream of a great Han empire. As long as strength permitted, the bigger the territory, the better. This wasn't just your ambition. It was also a task that future generations would have to keep grinding away at. The first step in the new year, continue pouring resources into constructing Fuma Pass and Liuyang Commandery. Once the population statistics for Liuyang Commandery came out before spring, you would transfer some people from there to support the construction in these two places. This would 1. Speed up the completion of the new commandery cities, and 2. Alleviate the potential pressure of overcrowding in Liuyang Commandery. After those two tribal alliances from the north scurried south, you planned to break them, into 3 parts and insert them separately into Fuma Pass, Hanyang City, and the new city in Liuyang Commandery. Break them up and integrate them, mix sand into the soil, make them quickly blend into the big Han tribe family, and incidentally, nip any potential sparks of rebellion in the bud. Your status as a founding figure was still very effective. Coupled with your intentional and unintentional shaping of public opinion, you were now practically a walking cheat code in everyone's eyes, almost like a god descended to earth. Fortunately, your prestige kept things stable. If anyone else were managing this mess, those ambitious tribal leaders underneath would have long since exploded. Besides you, no one could keep them in check. But for now, things were fine. The situation was excellent, not just good. In this era where eating was the top priority, as long as you could ensure they ate their fill at every meal, they would be very obedient. The saying, "Food is the first necessity of the people," was truly no joke. If everyone was starving, their chests sticking to their backs, who would listen to you spouting nonsense? Besides infrastructure, there was another major focus for next year: exploration. To explore the map faster, seize resource points, and expand the population. Besides continuing the prairie trade, you also needed to form a new exploratory trade caravan. This time, you wouldn't go by land. You'd try something new, take big boats, travel by water southward. One route starting from Liuyang Commandery would push south. Another route starting from Hanyang Commandery would follow the Rushui River north. According to Yu Ye's intelligence, the Rushui River at Hanyang Commandery's doorstep was just a tributary that flowed into a larger river further north, which supposedly led all the way to the cannibals' lair. While exploring, any good things discovered along the way would naturally have the Han tribe's flag planted on them, especially that crystal mine. Since no coal mines had been found yet, cheap glass couldn't be produced. If you wanted to make high-tech gadgets like magnifying glasses and telescopes, you had to use crystal for now. Although it was a bit extravagant, like washing your feet with champagne, there was no choice but to make do for the time being. After settling these public matters, there were your own personal projects, continuing to compile books. Currently, the only book printed by the Han tribe was Selected Poems, which was basically just a literacy textbook containing too few moral lessons. Therefore, your new goal was the Han rights, modeled after the rights of Zhou, specifically designed to establish various rules. This book first had to establish the matter of social classes. Classes existed in every era. If they couldn't be eliminated, they had to be managed. Rather than letting them develop freely and grow crooked, you might as well set the rules of the game yourself. You didn't really understand this whole class thing very well. After all, in your past life, your skill points were all allocated to science, engineering, and military affairs. You only remembered that the Qin and Han dynasties had something called the 20 ranks of nobility, dividing people into 20 levels from commoners to princes. Since there was a ready-made example, you decided to borrow it. But of course it had to be adapted to the actual situation of the Han tribe, not copied verbatim. With the hierarchy established, the next step was the main topic: how people of different levels should conduct weddings, funerals, sacrifices, greetings. This pile of troublesome matters gave you a headache. Most of your knowledge of etiquette came from historical dramas, which was seriously unreliable. Besides the Han rights, another book that absolutely had to be created was the Code of Law, or perhaps called Laws and Decrees. Basically the law. Laws, like etiquette, were rules. But this stuff was more complex and couldn't be perfected in one step. Society develops, and laws must be updated accordingly. You plan to first create a basic version, basic laws: murder punishable by death, assault by sentencing, theft by sentencing. Crimes like robbery and rape also had to be included. Then, detailed clauses would be added under these major categories. However, you added a special provision. All criminals would not serve jail time, only undergo reform through labor. Seriously, committing a crime and expecting the state to feed You for free. Dream on. The Han tribe was short on labor for construction. There was plenty of hard, tiring work on construction sites waiting for them to atone for their sins. In the new year, these 2 books had to be produced, at least establishing a framework with details to be filled in gradually later. Additionally, after the new year, the school had to open. In Hanyang City, every household with children aged 6 or older, in this world with 14 months a year, 6 years old was roughly equivalent to 7 in your previous life, had to send them to school. This would basically use up half of the 300-plus crash course students you had personally trained. Hanyang City had over 70 classrooms. 1 teacher teaching 2 classes, covering language and mathematics, would require 70 to 80 people. Add the 50 or 60 assigned to various county offices, and that was 150 gone. Of the remaining half, another 100 had to be drawn out to return to Liuyang Commandery as teachers. The final 50, you plan to put them into the 2 water route exploration teams next year. These people might not be highly skilled, but they had no problem with reading, writing, and accounting. With them around, the exploration teams would surely find it more convenient to record information and develop resources, at least allowing you to get a clearer picture of what the outside world looked like. You lay pa on your warm, heated kang, brick platform bed. Xiaodi had stoked the fire, making it cozy. Using the low kang table, you wrote down your grand blueprint for the next year, feeling quite pleased with yourself. However, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Or rather, heaven always loves to pour cold water on you when you're excited. Your plans were ambitious, but reality proved harsh. Just less than a month before the new year, a sudden situation disrupted all your arrangements. As the new year approached, the weather began to warm up, with midday temperatures already climbing above freezing. The ice on the Rushui River and Liuyang River began to melt, and the water levels slowly started to rise. This was originally a normal phenomenon, happening every spring, but what wasn't normal was Dali running over to report that the water level was rising abnormally fast. Compared to previous years, the speed was significantly quicker. Chief, the situation doesn't look good. Dali's face was grave. The river water is rising much faster than in previous years, and it's getting higher these past few days. I'm afraid if this continues, by the time spring arrives next month, the river might overflow its banks and flood our fields and the city. You were stunned for a moment, your mind blanking for several seconds. In the 3+ years you'd been here, you had never really considered that this place could flood. This was mountainous terrain. The altitude wasn't low, and it wasn't a basin. So how could there be a major flood? Was this some kind of joke? Are you sure? Is it really rising faster than before? You found it hard to believe your ears. Absolutely. Certain. If the chief doesn't believe me, you can go see for yourself. The water level at this time in previous years was never this high, Dali stated adamantly. His words made your brow furrow deeply. This was too messed up. If there really was a flood, the only option was to flee immediately. But this city, painstakingly built over 3 years, contained everything you owned. Just abandon it like that? Your heart bled at the thought. You weren't being pessimistic. Floods, when they came, arrived suddenly, and no one could stop them. In the current situation, build dikes? You must be joking. At this rate of rising water, who knew when it would suddenly burst? Even if you mobilized all the 1,000+ adults in Hanyang City to build dikes, working non-stop for half a month, how long could they build? Even if they built 2 kilometers, what damn use would that be? The river was so long. If you blocked this section, wouldn't the water just overflow from elsewhere? The most urgent task was to figure out the cause of the flood and assess the potential extent of the disaster. You had to prepare for the worst, leading the entire city, young and old, to pack up and flee. If it truly came to that, Hanyang City would immediately face the most severe food crisis. Even if the flood wasn't huge, just flooding the fields. What about next year's spring planting? Without planting crops, how many months could the grain stores feed these thousands of mouths? Thinking of this, you couldn't sit still any longer. You shot up from the kang, grabbed the bearskin coat draped over the bed, threw it on, and rushed outside, shouting at Dali as you ran, "Go! Get the elder, beast fang, one ear, stone, feather, big mouth, all those old timers. Let's go together and see if there's really a problem with the water level." They're all veterans of our Han tribe. Grew up by the river, more experienced than the newcomers. Hurry, you bring them to meet me at the east gate later. You had originally intended to head straight to the banks of the Rushui River to C4, yourself, but as soon as you ambled over to the east gate, you sensed something was wrong. Outside the east gate, the sturdy wooden drawbridge spanned the moat. In previous years, at this time, the water surface would be at least a meter below the bottom of the bridge. But now, there were still more than 20 days until the new year. Yet the water level had already surged up by over a foot, leaving only 60 or 70 centimeters between it and the bridge deck. A chill crawled up your spine. The moat was connected to the Rushui River outside. If it was like this here, the Rushui River itself, no need to look, it was definitely worse. Just as you were frowning and pondering, a jumble of footsteps sounded behind you. The elder, Ying Rui, Rat Shaman, Rat Da, Chief Shi. Quite the assembly. Nearly all of Hanyang City's top brass had arrived. Da, Li with his fast mouth had already spread the word. Hearing about a potential flood that could swallow their homes and fields, every face was etched with tension. They gathered around you, staring in unison at the water beneath the bridge. Hiss. The water really is much higher than in previous years. Yeah, but surely it won't actually flood, right? Everyone chattered nervously, their hearts pounding with anxiety, yet their words still clung to a sliver of wishful thinking. After all, if a flood came, the losses were painful just to think about. But burying one's head in the sand like an ostrich was useless. The problem would only worsen. Listening to their discussion, you actually calmed down. You were the leader. You couldn't panic. If you panicked, the people under you would completely lose their anchor. Panic spreads quickly. You couldn't let internal chaos erupt before the natural disaster even arrived. Elder, you immediately ordered, send a message to Liuyang Commandery in my name right away. Ask about their water levels. Have them assign people to monitor it in shifts, reporting daily. Hanyang City's water was rising. The Liuyang River to the east wasn't too far away. You needed confirmation quickly. Yes, Chief. The elder accepted the order and turned to leave. Seeing your methodical manner, the others seemed to find their backbone. Right, the chief is here, what's there to fear? The chief will definitely have a solution. Chief, what should we do? Dali asked quickly. Dali, you pointed towards the city interior. Go to the granaries, find empty sacks, and get people to fill them with earth. The more the better. Stack them at the 4 city gates. If a flood really hits, immediately use the sandbags to seal the gates tight. Don't let water pour in. Dali's eyes lit up. Right. That's a brilliant idea. The chief's mind really works fast. Yes, mission guaranteed. Ying Rui, you go block the outlets of the 8 main sewer drains in the city with sacks too. Notify everyone that dumping wastewater into them is temporarily forbidden. Have the county office personnel reassure the populace. For the next few days, household wastewater should be collected centrally using bucket carts, those large wooden barrel carts for hauling dung, and transported outside the city for disposal. That contraption looked like a crude version of a tanker truck. Yes, Chief, I'll see to it right away. Ying Rui also accepted his task and left. After arranging these 2 tasks, you looked back at the moat. Feather, you also take people to fill sandbags and block the 2 openings connecting the inlet canal and the return canal. Temporarily disconnect the moat from the Rushui River. Right, tie ropes to the sandbags before throwing them in. Or just use fishing nets to hold them. Otherwise, we might not be able to retrieve them later. Yes, Chief. Feather also quickly gathered his men and departed. Fortunately, consuming a lot of grain over the winter meant there were plenty of empty sacks. If worst came to worst, temporarily sewing bags out of cloth would work, though it felt a bit wasteful. Of course, these were all just damage control measures, like mending the pen after the sheep have bolted. If it truly came to a massive flood, these actions could at best reduce losses, not solve the fundamental problem. Having prepared for the worst in your mind, you turned back towards the city. Instead of going home, you went directly up to the corner tower on the east wall, found a seat by the window, and gazed out at the gloomy sky and the faintly rising water. Your mind raced. Where would a flood come from in the dead of winter? Summer. Flash floods after torrential rain made sense, but now was the dry season, with little rain or snow. There was no reason for so much extra water upstream, unless the downstream was blocked. Once this thought emerged, it spun wildly in your head. That's right, with the water rising so fast and the source volume unchanged, the most likely reason was that the downstream outlet was blocked by something. If the water couldn't drain, it would naturally accumulate higher and higher. Just as you were thinking outside the window, a giant eagle beat its wings carrying a message as it flew east. No point dwelling on it. You sighed, wrapped the bearskin coat tighter around yourself, descended the tower, and headed home. Best wait for news from Liuyang Commandery. That noon, Da Shu, who was overseeing Liuyang Commandery, received your carrier pigeon message. Seeing the flood warning, Da Shu was startled too. Liuyang Commandery was also situated by a major river, with tens of thousands of people. If it flooded, the consequences would be unimaginable. He quickly summoned a group of leaders to check the riverbank. When the results came in, everyone was both shocked and relieved. Shocked that the chief had predicted things with divine accuracy. The water level here was indeed rising rapidly. Relieved that, thankfully, the chief had warned them early. Otherwise, they would have been completely clueless, just waiting to be drowned. Da Shu immediately called all the various clan chiefs for a meeting to discuss countermeasures. But the meeting hall was dead silent. Most people, apart from being scared, were utterly useless, and some even suggested, maybe we should ask the chief what to do. However, Da Shu noticed several chiefs from newly joined smaller tribes whose eyes darted around, seemingly wanting to speak but hesitating, their expressions a strange mix of emotions. These were precisely the people who had poured in from the south in late autumn. Upon hearing about the flood, they all looked like birds startled by a bowstring, inevitably rousing Da Shu's suspicion. Da Shu narrowed his eyes, scanning those below, and directly called out, "That Chief Hua, you look like you're fidgeting. Do you have something to say? Now is the time to find solutions. If you have something to say, spit it out. Don't hold it in." The middle-aged man who was singled out flinched, stood up trembling, looked around, grew even more nervous, and stammered for a long time before finally forcing out, "My lord, flee upstream. That flood, it can't be stopped." As soon as these words were spoken, the room instantly erupted. Da Shu's brow furrowed tightly too. "I asked you for solutions, and you immediately yell about running away? Isn't that shaking morale?" "Nonsense," Da Shu scolded. "We have tens of thousands of people here. How can we not stop it? You talk as if you've seen it with your own eyes." Unexpectedly, Chief Hua nodded vigorously and shouted excitedly, "I have seen it. I really have. The flood is terrifying. It washes away boulders in the blink of an eye. Wild beasts are swept away like dumplings. If our tribe hadn't run fast enough, we'd have been long gone. Otherwise, why would we leave our decent lives and run north?" Everyone in the room was stunned. That statement contained a lot of information. Everyone knew many people had come from the south in late autumn, but no one had asked exactly why. You and Da Shu had previously assumed the Han tribe's reputation had spread, and people were coming to seek a better life. It turned out they were forced north as refugees because their homes in the south were washed away by floods. And from the sound of it, the downstream area had already flooded last year. "Is that true?" Da Shu was both shocked and furious. "Something this major, why didn't you say so earlier? I thought, since we've joined the Han tribe, why bring up past matters? Who knew this upstream area would also?" Chief Hua's voice grew smaller and smaller, daring not to say more. Da Shu's cold gaze swept across the entire hall, especially focusing on the newly arrived chiefs. Among you, who else migrated here because of the downstream floods? If you did, stand up. The moment he finished speaking, a large group of people stood up with a rustle. There were 40 to 50 of them. Out of the 70-plus southern tribes comprising over 10,000 people who had arrived in late autumn, the majority turned out to be flood refugees. Da Shu's heart skipped a beat. He understood everything, no wonder. Previously, the Liuyang labor market had run for a year, and the arrivals trickling in hadn't even reached 10,000. How could over 10,000 suddenly pour in during those 1 or 2 months in late autumn? It turned out disaster had struck downstream, making survival impossible. Lacking food for the winter, they encountered tribes heading north for work, while fleeing heard about the Han tribe's prosperity and strength, and only then came seeking refuge. Then who among you, Da Shu addressed the standing group, can tell me what exactly happened with the downstream flood? When did it occur? How severe was it? A quick-witted minor chief immediately rushed to speak, his voice still laced with fear. I know, it was summer. There were heavy rainstorms for several days. Lightning struck down large trees on the mountains. Then the flood came. Trees, rocks, all swept away by the water. Even part of a mountain collapsed. If we hadn't lived high up, we would have been finished. After hearing the first minor chief's description, Da Shu's gaze swept over the others, wanting to hear more accounts. Sure. Enough, another stood up. It rained heavily for days where we were too, but there was no flood. However, about 10 days after the rain stopped, the water in the river kept rising, eventually overflowing and flooding our homes. We had no choice but to run north. That situation is a bit like here now. The water just keeps getting higher. I think we should probably run too. Towards the end, his voice dwindled to a mosquito's hum. All right, another one advocating flight. In fact, many people present harbored this thought, especially those from smaller tribes who had joined. Recently, they didn't feel a strong sense of belonging to the Han tribe, but they also didn't want to give up their current good life. The most perfect scenario in their minds was for the entire Han tribe to flee together, following the main group, where couldn't they survive? Even if they struck out on their own, with the skills learned in the Han tribe these past few months, they could live better than before. However, wanting to run, not so easy. With Da Shu holding the fort, how could he let this group who had eaten and drunk for free all winter just run off? Let alone Da Shu disagreeing, even those senior chiefs wouldn't agree. They had scrimped and saved to feed these newcomers, counting on them for a big push in the spring. Would they let them just pat their behinds and leave? After the meeting, Da Shu first dismissed the newly arrived minor chiefs, then held a smaller meeting with the senior chiefs, sternly instructing them to keep a close eye on the newcomers to prevent anyone from sneaking away. The senior chiefs puffed out their chests and agreed. Seriously, this was future labor. What a loss if they ran off. Having arranged these matters, Da Shu quickly wrote down the changes in the Liuyang River's water level, as well as the intelligence gleaned from the new chiefs about the downstream flood and the surging river channel, detailing everything in a letter, and had a giant eagle deliver it back to you post-haste. You received Da Shu's reply that same day. After reading the contents, your tightly furrowed brow finally relaxed. It was just as you had guessed. The situation was clear. Last summer, the downstream region experienced super heavy rainfall, triggering mountain torrents, mudslides, or landslides. A massive amount of rocks, trees, and mud rolled into the river channel, blocking it downstream. With the flow obstructed, water accumulated downstream, causing the water level to surge, flooding vast areas of land and forming a huge barrier lake. Over the past 6 months or more, this barrier lake had grown larger and larger, finally filling all available space. The water began to backflow upstream, causing the water levels in Hanyang Commandery, Liuyang Commandery, and Liuyang Commandery to rise crazily as well. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before the foundation you had painstakingly built would turn into a vast ocean. This situation would persist until one day, The blockage downstream was breached, or the water flow found a new outlet on its own. But you couldn't wait. Watch 3 years of hard work go down the drain, returning. To square one overnight, not a chance. Relocate, impossible. Since you knew the root cause, you had to treat the symptom. There was only one way. Find the blocked spot downstream and figure out how to dig it open again. Let the water in the barrier lake flow back into the downstream river channel. As Dayu the Great said when controlling the floods, dredging is better than blocking. Building dikes now was definitely too late. The problem had to be solved at the source by clearing that blockage. A plan quickly formed in your mind. Boats. Although the Han tribe didn't have large ships now, small boats were plentiful. The carpentry workshop had been building boats for months to facilitate transport between Hanyang and Liuyang commanderies. Now there were 21 flat-bottomed small boats, plus the 2 previously used for transporting ore, totaling 23. These were all scow-like river barges, square at both ends with shallow drafts, 8 meters long and 3 meters wide, capable of carrying about 20 people and plenty of tools at once. Though only at the level of sampans, their strength lay in numbers. 23 boats could transport over 400 people at once, if they were all strong laborers, heading downstream to dig open the blockage should be sufficient. Thinking of this, you hesitated no longer. Time was tight. The temperature was rising day by day, accelerating the melting of ice and snow. If you really delayed until spring next month, it might be too late to salvage the situation. If spring, planting was delayed and the food supply chain broke, the entire Han tribe would descend into chaos, and your dream of a great Han empire would completely burst. You stuffed Dashu's reply into a drawer, grabbed a stack of fresh paper and wrote furiously, penning another letter to Dashu. In the letter, you first told him to make flood preparations, prepare more sandbags to block gates, and protect the granaries and fodder stores. Then came the main point. Have Dashu immediately mobilize a group of people to come over. This group must include the minor chief who had personally witnessed the landslide and the able-bodied men of his tribe. Also, the able-bodied men of the Chai clan, formerly the Fishing Fork tribe. Preferably also drawing some people from the Ling tribe. Altogether, gather no fewer than 300 able-bodied young men, in good physical condition, preferably swimmers. They must assemble within 2 days and be transported over by the fastest carts and horses. From assembly to arrival in Hanyang City, it must be completed within 4 days. No nonsense. Execute immediately. After writing the letter and waiting for the ink to dry, you immediately had Ying Rui dispatch a giant eagle. Thus, Liuyang Commandery would provide 300 men, and you would draw another 100 from Hanyang City, making a total of 400 able-bodied men. Led by you personally, you felt confident about handling that blockage downstream. There was no choice. This trip was dangerous, but you had to go personally. No one else knew what to do. These several hundred men were fine as laborers, but expect them to take charge and resolve the crisis independently. Don't even think about it. Looking across the entire Han tribe besides you, no one could shoulder this heavy responsibility. You were forced into this. With the plan finalized, you also got busy on your end. Liuyang Commandery was responsible for providing the manpower, while Hanyang City, though having fewer people, had to provide all the necessary supplies for the operation. Besides the crucial boats, oars were needed. Not enough oars? Shovels would do. They could dig earth and paddle water, serving 2 purposes and saving space. Also needed compasses, steel crowbars, long-handled axes, sledgehammers, steel chisels, steel saws, flint and steel, tung oil for fire starting, and large quantities of rope. With the tools ready, weapons were also necessary. Long spears for flags, bows and arrows, crossbows, taking all the few the tribe possessed. Finally, food. This trip would take at least 10 days to half a month. Food and drink for 400 people had to be brought in sufficient quantities. The supplies were almost ready. But the goal of this operation was to clear the downstream blockage. These tools were adequate for dealing with mud, sand, and small stones. But what if you encountered large obstacles? You hesitated, wondering whether to bring some heavy hitters, like nitroglycerin. The batch of sulfuric acid you produced earlier was still stored away. Later, you discovered a saltpeter mine, and subsequently used the sulfuric acid to make a batch of nitric acid, all sealed up. Now, only glycerin was missing. But this wasn't hard to obtain. Oil was the one thing the Han tribe didn't lack now. It could be produced in a few days, you pondered. Since the blockage was caused by mudslides and landslides, there would definitely be large rocks. Small rocks were manageable, but encountering giant boulders without explosives would be problematic. To increase the chances of success, you gritted your teeth and decided to prepare glycerin after all. You immediately sent people to procure it. The production process wasn't dangerous. Add soda ash to oil, separate the stearic acid and glycerin, then distill and concentrate the glycerin. As a byproduct, a pile of soap could be produced for daily. After arranging these things, you began selecting personnel in Hanyang City. First, you requisitioned the dozen or so members of the boat transport team specifically responsible for piloting the ore boats. The remaining men were drawn from various city districts, prioritizing those with children at home. If something happened, at least they would leave descendants behind. After 4 days of intense preparation, Hanyang City had its manpower and supplies ready. The 300 men mobilized from Liuyang Commandery also arrived, dusty from their journey by large carts. Many of these men were visiting Hanyang City for the first time, especially those who had joined only a few months ago. Seeing a city grander and livelier than Liuyang Commandery, particularly the 5-story wooden tower and the adjacent blue brick school building, left them gaping in amazement, like country bumpkins visiting the big city for the first time. Of course, they weren't summoned here for sightseeing. Most were assigned to rest in vacant barracks. Only those few minor chiefs who claimed to have seen the floods and landslides were brought to the county office building, which was your office. In the large office on the top floor, you sat behind a wide desk, a brazier burning charcoal provided, too. Warmth in the middle of the room. This building had neither central heating nor a heated kang, so you had to make do. Seeing the few minor chiefs being led in, you immediately sat up straight, wrapped your bearskin coat tighter, your expression serious. As the men entered the room, they first tutu sized you up. This was the first time they had seen the legendary chief up close. They were somewhat surprised. They hadn't expected the leader controlling tens of thousands of people, several cities, and hundreds of miles of land to be so young. Ahem. Someone nearby coughed softly as a reminder. The men snapped back to reality and quickly knelt on the ground with a thud, performing a deep and proper bow. You are now at the Son of Heaven level, after all. Receiving their obeisance was appropriate. Once they stood up, you got straight to the point. You few have personally witnessed the floods and rockfalls. If I take you back downstream, you still recognize the old river channel and the site of the landslide? I need someone to lead the way, to find that blockage. Only then did the minor chiefs understand. So the chief had urgently summoned them to act as guides, to go back and look at their old homes. But that place was all flooded now, water everywhere. How could they possibly recognize the way? Their hearts were filled with uncertainty. Don't worry, Chief. The valley might be flooded, but the mountains won't be, right? As long as the mountains are still there, I'll recognize them. A middle-aged minor clan leader guaranteed, thumping his chest. You nodded, thinking inwardly, right, flawless logic. If the mountains were gone too, what the hell would be the point of looking? Still, a few extra pairs of eyes were always good, saving you from taking unnecessary detours. Time was precious and couldn't be wasted getting lost. State your name. Which tribe are you from? You asked casually. Reporting to the chief, after our tribe joined the Han tribe. Lord Shu gave us the name Hua Clan. The middle-aged man quickly replied. You grunted non-committally, unmoved. All right, Hua Clan. I hope you're not just full of hot air. Now scram. Everyone head down and rest. We leave tomorrow morning. The Hua clan leader had just turned to leave when he sidled back, wringing his hands. Chief. Downstream is flooded so badly, how are we going to get through? It's really dangerous. Maybe he wanted to say, let's run for it. But glancing around your luxurious office, the grand wooden building, the impressive desk and chairs, the warm brazier, the bright paper windows, he swallowed the words. He was probably thinking, if I had a setup like this, I wouldn't run either. You naturally saw through his reservations and shot him an irritated glare, waving him away. Stop worrying about nothing. Your job is to lead the way and find the landslide. Get a move on and prepare. With that, you drove these wimps out, these country bumpkins. Oh, right, minor clan leaders had arrived by cart, so they weren't tired. It was their first time in Hanyang City, and everything looked novel, like provincials gawking at the big city. They insisted on wandering around, so Yingrui had no choice but to take them on a Hanyang City one-day tour. Unfortunately, in the dead of winter, the city was dusty and drab, with little worth seeing. The office building? They'd just been there, the school. Only the printing workshop was still clattering away. Finally, they went to the workshop district. The female workers in the textile workshop had long since gone home to hole up for the winter, sewing clothes and making shoes on their heated kangi. Leaving only the metallurgy and carpentry workshop still ringing with activity. The metallurgy workshop was Hanyang City's crown jewel, boasting the most advanced technology. Watching the red-hot copper and iron transform into weapons and farm tools in the blacksmith's hands, the minor clan leaders stared wide-eyed. Only then did they understand why your Han tribe had risen so quickly. It was all thanks to these miraculous tools. What they didn't know, however, was that you had secretly established a special department within metallurgy, the Mint. This place was highly secretive. No one except internal staff was allowed entry. Everyone knew such a place existed, but what minting coins even was or what it was for remained a complete mystery. You had originally planned to announce the major policy of private ownership in the coming days, but then the flood arrived. Well, just had to keep it under wraps for now. Leaving the metallurgy workshop, they visited the carpentry workshop. Liuyang Commandery also had a carpentry workshop, but compared to this one, it was a pale imitation. What piqued their curiosity were a dozen or so enormous, long wooden basins lined up in the open space outside, bigger than houses and looking quite imposing. What on earth are these? I saw one on the shore in Liuyang Commandery too. What are they for? It was that Hua clan leader again, turning to an important figure beside him, judging by the silver-white tin crown on his head, clearly someone not to be trifled with. This was none other than Yingrui, leader of the Eagle clan, one of your confidants, responsible for the courier eagles that flew through the skies. The Hua clan leader's swift arrival this time was entirely thanks to the giant eagles under Yingrui's command, delivering the message. Hearing the question, Yingrui drew himself up proudly and announced, "These are called boats. They travel on water. Tomorrow when you go downstream, you'll be riding in these." The minor clan leaders were instantly petrified. What? Carts were one thing, but things that could travel on water too? What kind of god-touched tribe was this Han tribe? The tour concluded, and this group of natives whose eyes had been opened, damn it, minor clan leaders, returned to the military, camped to rest. Thick woolen clothes and warm sheepskin jackets had already been prepared. This trip would take at least 10 days to half a month, and camping in the wild was unavoidable, so staying warm was essential. Meanwhile, the shed outside, the oil press workshop wasn't idle either. They were rushing to produce field rations. No, trail bread. Considering rice was difficult to carry, the standard ration had been changed to griddled flatbreads. They were the rock-hard kind of leavened bread, perhaps like guokui. You weren't entirely sure yourself, only knowing that once dried, these things could last a month without spoiling. Effective enough. The dough had been proofed by individual families on their heated kang, with added syrup water and eggs, making it a deluxe version, then gathered at the shed to be cooked on special large iron griddles. 3 per person per day, enough for 5, meaning each person had to carry 15 bricks. Of course, this was just emergency rations. Pots and rice were the mainstays. In this freezing weather, who would want to gnaw on hard bread when they could have something hot? Dried meat and salted fish were also plentiful. After all, this was physical labor. They couldn't work on empty stomachs. After much rushing around, preparations were finally complete. The second Monday of the last month of winter was departure day. The large boats from the carpentry workshop were hauled out of the city with much grunting and effort, launched first into the moat, then pulled by ropes into the Rue River to rendezvous. With the fleet already waiting there, 400 men stood ready. Dili and Yu Mao, those 2 blockheia or capable lieutenants, were counting heads and assigning teams. 20 men per boat, each with a veteran boatman as captain. Without these experienced hands in command, the novices would surely spin the sea. Boats like tops. You stood on the bank bidding farewell to the well-wishers, mainly instructing Ying Rui. Ying Rui, while I'm gone, keep an eye on things here in Hanyang Commandery. Leave city affairs to the magistrate. You just supervise. Spring plowing is crucial. Don't let flood prevention delay it. Keep a close watch on the farm tools and livestock. I don't want to come back and have to worry about farming. Ying Rui, face serious, nodded firmly. Rest assured. Chief, I guarantee I'll hold down the fort. You clapped his shoulder. All right, if anything urgent comes up, have the Eagle send word. We're off. With that, you leaped onto a boat yourself, planted your feet at the bow, and with a flourish, drew your prized longsword, Emperor's Fury, pointing forward commandingly. Depart, though you suspected the reality might be somewhat less than impressive. Sure enough, the scene was initially chaotic. While most of them could doggy paddle, rowing was a matter of skill. Fortunately, the novice training had paid off somewhat. The captains beat time with bamboo clappers, or whatever they were using, and everyone gradually synchronized their movements following the chanted rhythm. After a morning's struggle, these rookies finally got the hang of it, and the fleet's speed picked up. Heading downstream, moving south, the river channel gradually widened. At first it was fine, the river at its widest, perhaps 20 meters across. But by the afternoon, the scene changed dramatically. It wasn't that the river had widened, it was that you couldn't find the freaking banks anymore, or rather you couldn't find normal banks. Along the way, countless trees that should have been on the bank were now submerged, only their crowns visible above the water. Whoa! The water level downstream had risen to an unbelievable degree. It seemed the lower reaches were truly blocked, forming a massive barrier lake. You felt even more certain. No wonder last summer's incident was only affecting the upstream. Now, what a colossal reservoir this must be, taking over half a year to fill. Water travel was indeed much faster than land travel. The ancients weren't wrong. That old saying about covering 1,000 li to Jiangling in a day might be an exaggeration, but covering hundreds of li in a day was definitely possible. Thinking back, hauling ore from the iron mines back to Hanyang City took 5 or 6 days by land, but only half a day one way by water, a round trip possible in a single day. And this was just with manpower for rowing. Add sails. You clicked. Your tongue in thought. The fleet traveled for a day and by the second day had covered hundreds of li. The water surface grew ever wider, feeling almost like sailing on a lake. In some low-lying areas, the riverbanks, if you could still call them that, were long submerged, the water flowing directly into the woods. Progress became difficult. The water looked wide but was shallow, the bottom thick with weeds, shrubs, and vines. Every so often, someone's oar or shovel would get snagged, forcing the fleet into frustrating stop-start progress. Both banks were submerged forests. Going ashore? Impossible. Finding dry firewood to build a fire? Dream on. There was no choice, but to find a relatively safe patch of water and moor the boats to sturdy trees. Dinner was cold bricks and dried meat. They made do. Everyone wrapped their furs tighter and dozed, leaning against the insides of the boats. Of course, safety came first. You arranged sentries, with boats taking turns standing watch through the night. You also picked a few agile young men to climb the large trees as lookouts, a primitive version of a crow's nest. How cool is that? The next day, after casually gnawing on some dry rations, the fleet continued drifting south. A thick fog rose from the water in the early morning, making it feel like entering an ethereal realm, albeit one where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Rowing? Don't be ridiculous now. It was all about drifting with the current, occasionally using an oar to adjust direction, basically going with the flow. They drifted like this until nearly noon before the fog reluctantly began to dissipate. Just then, the fleet encountered a little surprise. Thump, a dull sound as if something had bumped against the hull of a boat. On one of the boats ahead, the old fellow in charge at the bow suddenly yelled at the top of his lungs, "Chief, there's a dead tiger in the water." His voice carried so clearly you could hear it perfectly 3 boats away. You turned back, signaling your boat to stop and wait for the other boat to approach. "What's all the fuss? What dead tiger?" As the 2 boats came alongside, the old fellow was struggling to push a huge carcass between the boats with a long spear. "Chief, look! Dead! A tiger!" The young captain's face flushed with excitement as if he'd struck gold. It was no wonder he was excited. For their former small tribes, even a dozen men would detour if they spotted a tiger. To hunt one, the entire tribe's able-bodied men would mobilize, scout ahead, prepare traps and torches, and brace for casualties. Now, stumbling upon a dead one for free. Wasn't this like manna from heaven? You, however, frowned. The creature looked feline, but it was enormous, at least 2 or 3 meters long, swollen like a balloon, its fur soaked white. Based on your pitiful knowledge from natural history museums, this was probably a cave lion. It looked like it had died in early winter, soaked for at least 3 months. "Get rid of it," you said with disgust. "It's been dead so long, all bloated. The hide's ruined too, useless. Hauling it up might even spread disease. Pass my order. No one is to drink river water anymore. There are dead things in the water. It's contaminated. Drinking it could kill. You, find a place to land today, melt some snow and ice for water." Hearing this, the young captain shivered, quickly using his spear to push the windfall further away. Good grief, he'd almost been tempted to haul it up, skin it, and eat the meat. You pondered. This unlucky lion had no visible wounds. It probably drowned falling through thin ice in winter, and only floated up now that the ice had melted. The fleet continued onward. Your order passed from boat to boat. Hearing there were corpses in the water and drinking it could be fatal, everyone grew a little anxious. Fortunately, your instruction to find ice and snow to melt calmed them slightly, but they hadn't gone far before more surprises appeared in the water. Great. Horned deer, timber wolves, wild boars, leopards, vampire deer. What a ridiculous name. Monkeys, wild oxen. Carcasses of all kinds popped up like dumplings being dropped into a pot. You only allowed them to chop off a few wild ox horns. Everything else was strictly off limits. Until noon, when something floated ahead on the water. A person. It was a prone body draped over a broken log, face frighteningly pale, clad in animal skins, looking like a woman. You had your boat approach. The men on the boat showed little reaction. In these times, seeing dead bodies was common, nothing surprising. It was you who felt a touch of sentiment. In modern times, someone probably would have screamed and called the police by now. The boat drew near. You glanced at the female corpse and on an impulse poked the log beneath her with an oar. The log wobbled, and the corpse unceremoniously slid into the water. She looked quite fresh, not very swollen, and sank straight down after falling in. Just as the water was about to cover her head, suddenly, the corpse struggled violently, hands flailing wildly on the surface, managing to grab hold of the log again, then draped herself over it, coughing frantically. Holy shit! It's alive! You were so startled you nearly tumbled off the bow. The others on the boat fared no better, staggering about. If they hadn't been sitting, a whole bunch probably would have fallen over. These rough men weren't afraid of dead bodies, but a dead body coming back to life was too much. Reanimation. Your mind raced. What's going on? Not completely dead? She was holding on to the log. Maybe she wasn't dead at all. Or maybe a transmigrator. Good heavens, could it be such a coincidence? Two unlucky souls having a bizarre encounter in this primitive world. Whatever the situation, pull her out first. What if she really was from your world? Even if she spoke English, that would be something. You were all alone in this godforsaken place, among tens of thousands of subordinates who understood the loneliness in your heart. The woman coughed violently. Catching her breath, she heard the exclamations nearby and turned her head, her eyes meeting yours. Eyes met. Confirmed from the look. Not the person I was looking for. Sigh. Got excited for nothing. You saw surprise in her eyes first, then relief, followed by fear. A typical contradictory mix of wanting rescue from strangers yet being afraid, utterly lacking the spark of intelligence of a modern person. Still, it was a human life. Rescuing her could add to the tribe's numbers, right? Come up? You extended a hand towards her. The woman's eyes flickered. She was clearly hesitating. She looked around at the strange, large wooden basins, boats, filled with people floating on the water. Then she looked at you, your head adornments, the furs you wore, clearly the sharpest guy in the group. He must be the leader, the woman probably concluded inwardly. Only then did she timidly place her hand in yours. The feel. Slippery and ice-cold to the bone. Obviously, after soaking in the water for so long, how could it not be slippery? In this weather, the water temperature was probably only a few degrees above freezing. Surviving was practically a miracle. With a heave, you pulled her aboard. The woman was dressed quite warmly, with hide clothes and a skirt, even boots on her feet, hide wrappings tied with vines, though everything was soaked through. She crawled onto the boat, huddled in the middle, hugging her legs and shivering. Uncontrollably, head bowed, not daring to look around. Chief, this is a living person? Only then did a crewman react, asking stammeringly, Nonsense. What did you think? Can't you see her breathing? You retorted with a half-joking, half-exasperated tone. The men chuckled foolishly, all curiously staring at the woman. Seeing her shivering violently, wet clothes clinging to her body, knowing she'd freeze to death even after being rescued if this continued, you roared at the men on your boat. What are you looking at? Everyone turn around. Face the sides. Anyone caught peeking, I'll throw him overboard to feed the fish. The crewmen immediately put on, oh, I get it. Lewd grins, turning away, their shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. The woman crouched in the middle of the boat's bow. It was quite wide, over 3 meters at the beam, more spacious than a small truck. Although the men on both sides had turned their heads, she felt one pair of eyes still fixed on her. Looking. If it was you, take them off, wear this. You took off your bearskin coat and handed it to her. Gratitude flashed in the woman's eyes. She quickly forced a smile and reached for it, but couldn't pull it away. She looked at you, puzzled. Take off your wet clothes before putting this on, you repeated, pointing at her soaked garments in case she didn't understand. The woman understood. After a moment's hesitation, she trembling untied her wet hides. She was wrapped quite thickly. Perhaps she held a decent status in her tribe, but she didn't look old. Definitely young. Probably just reached adulthood. Ahem. You coughed dryly to cover the awkwardness. Seeing she had finished undressing, you quickly wrapped your bearskin coat around her, feeling the residual warmth from your body on the coat. The girl's eyes reddened and she began to cry, but silently, just letting tears stream down. She was probably afraid of displeasing you and being thrown back into the water. She had been a sacrifice thrown into the water by her own tribe, if she hadn't been lucky enough to grab the log. Thinking of this, she felt wronged and terrified, tears falling even faster. All right, everyone get moving, continue forward. You waited until she was wrapped up securely before giving the order. The men, sharing an unspoken understanding, began to row, knowing smiles playing on their faces. Ignoring the crew, you shot them a glare, then took out a flatbread from your bag, shaved a few slices of salt pork with your dagger, put them inside, and handed it to the girl. Afraid she wouldn't understand, You took a bite first as demonstration. Seeing food, the girl's eyes lit up. She quickly took it and huddled inside the coat, gobbling it down ravenously. After just a few bites, she started choking, eyes rolling. Back. Speechless, you handed her your snakeskin waterskin. Sigh, if only there were a bowl of hot meat porridge now. But conditions didn't allow it. You hadn't eaten anything hot in 2 days yourself. You could only hope this girl was tough. The fleet continued onward, still encountering various animal carcasses floating in the water. The girl's face turned pale watching them, but she remained silent, just staring blankly at the men rowing on either side and at your back. She was filled with curiosity about everything, especially these miraculous contraptions that could carry so many people across the water. They traveled in silence, everyone conserving their energy. Only the thump-thump of the captain's bamboo, clappers, and the rhythmic sound of rowing broke the quiet. It wasn't until a piece of land, like a small island, appeared where the water met the sky ahead, that the girl finally spoke. "Over there! Can't go!" She pointed urgently in that direction, jabbering a stream of words you couldn't understand, her face etched with terror. You looked back at her. Oh, finally willing to talk? Though unintelligible, her panic seemed genuine. Was she pointing at the island ahead? You followed her gaze and also noticed something wrong. No, something exciting. "Chief, there are people there. Smoke, they must be cooking." "Yeah, Chief, let's land. Find some dry wood and boil some hot soup. We're freezing to death. Chief, let's go ashore. Haven't had hot food in 2 days, my legs are numb." Seeing the cooking smoke rising from the island, the men on the boats howled as if they'd been shot full of adrenaline. The girl, however, frantically shook her head, grabbing your trouser leg and shaking it hard, urging you not to go. Could there be danger? You wondered inwardly. But looking back at the imposing fleet of over 20 boats, more than 400 strong men fully equipped with bows, crossbows, swords, spears, and shields, what couldn't they handle? Thus, ignoring the girl's plea, you waved your hand forcefully and roared, "Everyone prepare to land. Yes, Chief's orders, land, land. The Chief says land, let's build fires and cook." The order mutated as it was passed along. Frozen for 2 days, the mere mention of landing for hot food sent everyone into a frenzy, rowing desperately. The fleet instantly transformed from a long line into a scattered formation, racing towards the island. Anyone watching might have thought it was a dragon boat race. As the boats drew closer, you saw the scene on shore clearly, and fury instantly surged within you. On a piece of high ground by the bank, an old man, head adorned with deer antlers and stuck full of colorful feathers, was dancing wildly like a shaman performing a ritual. Before him, 2 adults each held a wailing toddler, looking less than 2 years old. They were posturing as if to throw the children into the water. This was human sacrifice? You watched helplessly as the old man finished his prayer, and the 2 adults, without hesitation, tossed the children into the air, throwing them into the icy river. Splash, splash. Even from a distance, you felt like you could hear the desperate sounds of them hitting the water. A wave of rage shot straight to your head. You came from a civilized society. How could you tolerate such barbaric disregard for human life? Looking down again at the girl tightly gripping your trouser leg, shivering, she had probably been one of these sacrifices before. Everyone row faster. Save them first. You roared at everyone, eyes burning with fury. If those children aren't saved, nobody eats today.